Michel DeGraff is professor of linguistics at MIT, co-founder and co-director of the MIT Haiti Initiative, founding member of Académie Créole Haïtienne, and fellow of the Linguistic Society of America. Michel entered linguistics through the back door, so to speak, in 1985 as a summer intern at AT&T Bell Laboratories Linguistics and Artificial Intelligence Department in Murray Hill, New Jersey. Michel obtained his PhD in 1992 with a dissertation on the syntax of Haitian Creole. Today, Michel's research contributes to an egalitarian approach to Creole, indigenous and other non-colonial languages and their speakers, as in his native Haiti. In addition to linguistics and education, his writings engage intellectual history and critical race theory, especially the links between power, knowledge, hierarchies, and the hegemonic misrepresentations of non-colonial languages and their speakers in the global South and beyond. His work is anchored in a broader agenda for human rights and social justice, with Haiti as one spectacular case of a post-colony where the national language spoken by all, Haitian Creole, is systematically disenfranchised, even in certain scholarly traditions, while the former colonial language, in this case French, spoken by few in Haiti, is enlisted for socioeconomic, political, and geopolitical domination. Such devalorization of Haitian Creole and other non-colonial languages worldwide, especially among Black and Brown people, is embedded in long entrenched patterns of structural racism and white supremacy, whereby language and education are enlisted as tools for neocolonialism from within and from without. Michel tackles these political challenges head-on, as he enlists language and linguistics for decolonization and liberation. He unveils age-old myths about Creole languages in linguistics and beyond, and he engages through the MIT Haiti Initiative in a broad campaign for democratization, access to quality education, and for the universal respect of human rights. Through the strategic use of open education resources in Creole, the platform of MIT Haiti effectively sets up a model for oppressed communities to constructively enlist the native languages and cultures as tools for quality education and for inclusion of all other spheres where knowledge and power are created and transmitted. Really, language is a powerful tool for decolonization and liberation, as it is for colonization and domination. What a bio sketch. Welcome, Professor DeGraff. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the invitation. It's really a pleasure to be here with you all. And so let me start. I'm going to share some slides, and I'm very happy that we have that much time to really discuss and ask some tough questions about the topic at hand today. So as the title says, I'm going to be focusing on one person that I've admired for many, many, many years, since I was a baby, actually, since I was a student. Her name is Suzanne Comhaire-Sylvain. And she was very inspiring for me as a budding linguist, learning about this woman who back in the 1930s, was producing this amazing work on Haitian Creole at a time when Creole was not even viewed as a quote-unquote valid language. But it's only recently that I got to learn more about her work, thanks to the invitation of Dominique Dupuis, Ambassadors Dominique Dupuis, the ambassador of Haiti at UNESCO. They were celebrating her life just a couple of weeks ago, March the 8th, on the day of for women, International Women's Day at UNESCO. And so for that celebration, I got to really dig deeper into a biography. And so I'm very thankful to the UNESCO team for having invited me to be part of the celebration. So I want to show you some slides, and I want to show you some of the pictures that UNESCO put together for that celebration. And we'll start with that. It was a very moving occasion to be celebrating someone whom I've admired for decades, really. So do you all see my screen? Yes?
Yes, we see.
Perfect. So this was actually two of the posters at UNESCO on March the 8th to celebrate Suzanne Sylvain. So I'll take the occasion to thank the ambassador Dominique Dupuis, her husband Cyril Pessoir, and the brochure about Sylvain's life was produced by an amazing team with Sabine Lamour, Carson Dorsey, Anaël Barrault, and other members of the team are Marie Cyprien and Betty Célestin. And basically, what I want to start with is the fact that although we're separated in time, but Suzanne Sylvain and myself, we have the same fundamental objective, which back in 1936 for Sylvain, in the 30s for Sylvain, was to really valorize Haiti's national language, Creole, which is the one language that binds all Haitians together. This is a very important point. But when I read Sylvain's book, which is Le créole haïtien, morphologie et syntaxe, I was actually first impressed by how detailed the analysis were comparing Haitian Creole, which I've just called Creole for now, Creole, French, and the Bay languages, focusing on Ewe, spoken today in Benin. So those comparisons showed some really interesting correspondences among the three languages. But then she concluded with the statement that Haitian Creole is really an Ewe language, as an Ewe grammar, with French words. Basically, she said that it's French words in the mold of African syntax, meaning Ewe syntax. So that conclusion took me by surprise, given the data in the book. But at the same time, when I was looking at a biography to try to understand how she came to that conclusion, in a way, this map says a lot. The map on the right-hand side of the slide. So, in fact, the title is "The Women of Haiti, of Africa, and the World." So, given that this is the African Studies Global Forum, it's really important for you all to, if you have a chance, to really look into Sylvain's biography and bibliography, because she did lots of work in the Congo, in Cameroon, in Nigeria. In fact, she died in Nigeria. And much of this work was not only to valorize our Africanity in Haiti, but also to valorize women. She was a staunch feminist. And as an anthropologist, she really was a very fine ethnographer, looking at parts of society that were often neglected back in this early period of the 30s. So really an amazing figure. But here I'm going to focus really on her work as a linguist. Okay, because as you see, the title of the talk is Afrocentricity versus this mission civilisatrice, or the white man's burden, in Sylvain's créole haïtien, morphologie et syntaxe. Okay, and as I said earlier, I've been reading her work really for decades, and her work is so full with gems in terms of a data analysis and a comparisons. So now what I want to do to introduce this presentation is to try to think of Sylvain's biography and that book about créole haïtien in a much larger context, because I want you to be able to place her at a time when, as she was producing this work on Haitian Creole, she, like many of us today, she was under the weight of white supremacy, right? So she wanted to valorize a native language, a national language, but she was struggling with colleagues, with a social milieu, like we are today, like I am today, even in the 21st century at MIT. She was struggling with colleagues for whom what was at the core of a project, which is basically decolonization and liberation of herself and the people, those words, those terms were dangerous. They were viewed as threatening, really an existential threat to a system of white supremacy, right? So that's what we have to really appreciate Sylvain's work. We have to put ourselves in that frame of mind. What do we do as anti-colonial intellectuals who at the same time have been socialized and have to deal with a very colonial, a very white supremacist milieu, intellectual milieu. Okay, so this is the envelope. So, and it is only now that I've got to deeply understand what Sylvain was struggling with, connecting it to my own struggles today as a linguist. So as I go and talk more about Sylvain's work, what I like for you to think about is think of her work in the 30s, again, as using language, linguistics, and education as tools for decolonization and liberation. And always think of this project of Sylvain at two levels, at the individual level, but also at a societal level, and even at a geopolitical level. So maybe there might be even three levels: the individual, the community, the nation, and then the geopolitics of a world back then and of our world today. Okay, so let's keep this in mind. And now what I'm going to try to do is to take you through really 4 centuries, maybe 5 centuries of the history of language, linguistics, and education, using Sylvain's life as a prism to understand this interaction between those 3 domains and how they still impact us, how this interaction under the weight of white supremacy still impact us today, okay? So now I'm going to take you to a Haitian classroom in the 21st century, okay? Not the 17th century, not the 18th century, not the 19th century, the 21st century. Okay, a classroom where, and actually a note about language, because I've invited some of my friends and colleagues from Haiti, and since I'm speaking English, out of respect for those I've invited, the slides are going to be in Creole. Okay, so at least the slides themselves tell a story, a parallel story that those who don't speak English or don't speak English fluently, they can make sense of the narrative that I'm trying to share. Okay, so the slides are all in Creole. So Creole écrit, Creole comprendre. Okay, and again, this is also in the spirit of Sylvain, in the spirit of valorizing Haiti's national language, to show that it can be written and it can express any complex concept. And likewise, some linguists themselves believe about Creole being exceptional and therefore not having the same level of expressivity as other languages. Okay, so slides are in Creole, and there will also be some French and some English in the slides, but many of them have Creole text in them. Okay, so the point of this slide here is that in the 21st century in Haiti, you have children who are being called guerrillas. This is a system called, actually, which was inherited from France, a system of symbol or jeton, where if you misbehave, you're given a card or a poster to carry around. So in this case, or you put it on your desk. It says, "I must always speak French, otherwise I'm the gorilla of the class." Now imagine a country that was born out of the premise, out of the message, tout moun c'est moun, meaning every person is a person. It was showing that Black people were as humans as the white colonizers. After we've been independent since 1804, after a brilliant victory against the French army, the French genocidal racist army, we won that war. And today in Haiti, children are being taught that if they don't speak French, they are not human. This is quite spectacular. On the right, what you see is a threat of this teacher telling the students, speak French, otherwise I'll cut your tongue. I'll cut your physical tongue if you speak your mother tongue. Again, this is a cartoon, but this cartoon is connected to a research project that you can find on the platform MIT IET, questioning students about what kind of punishments they've gotten in the classrooms when they speak Creole. It's a very heartbreaking report, but it's I went through it, so I know for certain that this is not exaggerated. This is a fact. Children are made to wash their mouth with vinegar and lemon when they speak Creole, to wash the Creole out of the tongue, and this is in the 21st century. So now let's go back. And something else that you have to understand is that a system like this, where children are still being taught to despise their native language, a school system that has anything of that sort at the core can only fail, because a student who cannot take pride in the language, in the identity, in who they are, cannot succeed. Of course, there will be, some outliers who will still succeed, but the majority will have to fail. Okay, so let's keep that in mind as we proceed. And now this is 21st century. Now I'm going to take you back to the 20th century, when I myself was a student in actually a fancy school in Haiti called Saint-Louis Gonzague. It was supposed to be, quote unquote, a very good school, if not one of the best schools. But in that school that I attended, this is what I was reading. And listen to this. This is part of the history of Haitian literature. So this is supposed to be a course where you're supposed to take pride in the literature of your country. And we're made to read a poet called Boer, and notice the dates, 1902, 1965, the contemporary of Suzanne Sylvain. So as Suzanne Sylvain was producing a book on Haitian Creole, a famous poet called Boer, who back then as a child had to study, was teaching us things like, this question of Creole, forget it, it's ridiculous. I must ask you, what fame will Haiti ever get from this Creole language? And then he goes on to say, Creole will never be anything but an inferior variety of French. And then, this is the part that, in terms of education, that might be the most striking. He says that parents never speak Creole to your children. You have to show no mercy in correcting your children's quote-unquote Creolisms, because to speak French, you have to get into the habit of using it. Now you can see why today there would still be those signs that says that if you don't speak French, you're a gorilla, because the idea is that to be human, you have to speak French. Okay? And now, again, I have to stress this. Haiti is a country where everyone speaks Creole, and most, including parents, speak Creole only. So the notion that parents should speak only French to the children would entail then that parents should stay mute, not speak to the children at all, right? And we know, as linguists, we know that this would be impossible. And the idea that you have to remove all quote-unquote Creolisms, meaning influence of Creole to the children's French, that's impossible. How can a child who speaks Creole at home, who's immersed in a Creole speaking community, how can they ever speak French without quote-unquote Creolism? It's impossible, right? But this is what we're made to believe as children in one of Haiti's best schools. And interestingly, I graduated from high school in Haiti in 82. And 82 is a famous year in the history of Haitian education. Why? Because in 82, there was this famous Minister of Education, a really visionary, called Joseph C. Bernard. And actually, tomorrow is the 42nd anniversary of this historical reform that goes by the name of the minister, Reform Bernard. And so when he was Minister of Education, he came up with this reform project over 3 years, 79 to 82. And what you see here is the decree that was published on March 30th, 1982. And what was really spectacular in this reform is the fact that it explained very clearly that Haiti will always be failing as a country, and also failing the children, if the children cannot use their home language in the classroom. And the key article is this one that you see here, Article 29, that Creole is the language of instruction, which will, for brief, we'll call LOI. Creole is the language of instruction, the LOI, and also the language that's taught throughout the first 10 years of schooling, which is called École Fondamentale. So, which was obligatory in Haiti. It still is. So the first 10 years Creole is the LOI, okay? And then French is to be taught throughout. And then it also becomes a secondary LOI studying in the 6th grade. Okay, that was really revolutionary in it to have this document in 1982. Now, guess what happened since then? It's been 42 years, right? So you might imagine that, now it could be a given that Creole is used indeed as the LOI with pride, with joy. But guess what? It hasn't happened yet. Now there's a chance that it might be happening with the current minister, Manigat. But the politics in Haiti are so fraught that we never know where things might go. But what I want to do now with you is to take you very quickly through 42 years of reform in Haiti in terms of the school system. And if you want to read more about it, you can go to my website. We have long articles about these reform efforts. But I'll just go very quickly to the history. So I just mentioned to you the Reform Bernard, and the striking thing that you can see in this table is the fact that Creole remains the LOI, the language of instruction, throughout the École fondamentale, okay, the first 10 years of schooling. And then actually Bernard had this vision that, in fact, Creole should remain the LOI all the way up to university. And he explained why, right? And it's not Creole versus French, it is that the students will actually learn French as a second language and will do better when they can learn French from the foundations of the native language. Now the next table is the one that is striking. And now, again, think about the role of education in processes of neocolonization and oppression, right? This is really language and education as tools for white supremacy, okay, and geopolitical domination. Because what you see in 2021, right, almost 40 years after the Réforme Bernard, there is a document called, in French, the Cadre curriculaire. Basically it's a curricular framework. And what does it ask? It asks that Creole be used as LOI only in the first 4 years, and that starting in the 5th year, Creole is excluded in the classroom as LOI. Only French should be the LOI. Now, what's even more striking with this COC, or in Creole we call it the COC, is the fact that it also recognizes that most teachers are not fluent in French, and it also recognizes that students themselves, they will not be fluent in French in the 5th grade. They might become fluent much later, in later grades, which means that the document knows that what it's asking in terms of which LOI should work in the classroom is basically, it's a recipe for failure, right? And guess where this document comes from? So this project called Nectar. It's actually a very ironic name because nectar is supposed to be something sweet, but it's a bitter pill for Haitians. This document was funded by the French Agence Française de Développement, the French Agency for Development, and it was produced with the help of actually, I shouldn't say French experts, I should say experts from France, because among these, there are also Haitians coming from France to consult with the Haitian Ministry of Education were behind these efforts to remove Creole as LOI in the classroom and impose French only. Now, what's even more ironic and criminal is the fact that this document claims that it is trying to implement the Bernard reform, yet it contradicts one of the basic elements of this reform, right? So, but there was lots of pushback, including pushback from myself and my colleagues at MIT Haiti, other educators and linguists. And luckily, in 21, Minister Manigat, who was minister back in 2014 and 15, we worked with them, trying to launch a joint project with MIT Haiti and the Ministry of Education. And Manigat, God bless his soul, is a real educator. He understands the role of language education, and he said, okay, we need to remove this bizarre element in the COC. Let's make sure that now Creole remains the LOI throughout the school system. Now, which was a major step forward. It's like you take one step back, two steps forward, etc. So that's what we have today, right? Which is quite something to rejoice about. There are still glitches in that COC of 2023. For example, there's a major glitch in terms of the objective of the school system to make children become balanced bilingual, which is impossible in the context of Haiti. If children are immersed in Creole, they have no chance to ever become balanced bilingual. What the best they can do is to become what Bernard called back in the 80s. Bernard wanted the children to be functional bilingual, meaning that you learn in your native language and you learn French, English as second languages. You might function in French in certain domains, but he didn't aim at having children become balanced bilingual. Now, the part that's even more tricky is the fact that the COC of 2023, it says on paper that the aim is to have functional bilingualism, like Bernard did. But if you look under the hood, as they say, you'll see that what they're actually asking is equal competence in all domains for Creole and French, in Creole and French, which makes, again, so they call it functional bilingualism, but in fact, what they aim at, if you read the actual text of the COC, what they want is balanced bilingualism. So major glitch in the proposal, but at least Creole is back where it belongs to be. Okay, now the problem that although we spent some time talking about education and language, but the problem goes beyond language, right? The problem is really one of identity, culture, geopolitics, and how language and education create a milieu where Haitians feel lesser in various ways, especially the majority Haitians, those who look like me, who don't look white, those who are racialized as Blacks, okay? And actually, what I'm going to show you now is the way that the textbooks themselves, so the Haitian textbooks, like textbooks everywhere, so are engines for supremacy, okay? Again, but what's bizarre about Haiti is that these are textbooks produced by Black people, and yet those textbooks teach Black people to hate the Blackness in a country that was founded on the premise that tout moun c'est moun, nek c'est moun tout. Okay. Now let me translate this for you. So this is from Michel, educator in Haiti. So he explains that those manuals in Haiti and the entire school system are tools to colonize the minds of Haitian children. And one of the things that these books do or try to do is to convince children that there is a scientific concept of, quote, race. And according to this concept, of race in those books, there is a Black race and there is a white race, and the Black race is inferior to the white race. And it goes, and it's very graphic. So in this text that you see here in French, it says that the Black race is the bossal, meaning the uncouth, with the big toes, the big mouth, the big nose, and the white race, conveys politeness, elegance, beauty, luxury. And these are what kids are getting in Haitian schools, right? And then what you get as a result, the fact that, I don't know, many of you might remember the Dole test. So the Dole test in the 40s in the US was used in this famous case in the Supreme Court called Brown versus Board of Education in 1954. So it was an effort to desegregate US schools. And what they used is to show that Black kids, they were so colonized, they were so alienated from their identity that if they're given a choice between the Black doll and the white doll, they would pick the white doll as the prettier one, the smarter one, etc. And that showed that those kids, they've been socialized into believing that they're inferior. Now, one would expect that in Haiti, that would be different because in Haiti, Blacks are the majority, right? But yet in Haiti today, this is an article from last year in Igbo Post, where the article documents the fact that Haitian kids, many Haitian kids are afraid of Black dolls. They see the Black dolls as being devilish, as being ugly, as being threatening, and they prefer white doors, and I've seen it myself. I've seen it. I've gone to stores where all the doors are white. I've gone to events where, even events that celebrate Haitian culture, and at those events, those kids, as rewards, what do they get? They get white doors, not black doors, even though those events are about promoting Haitian culture, right? So it's deep, it's deep. So I wrote this article a couple of years ago in the New York Times about this very issue, the fact that the Haitian school system, what it does, it teaches Haitian children to hate ourselves, to hate our language, to hate the way we look, the way we are. So, and the part, again, I keep repeating this contrast between 1804, the revolution of Haiti, based on the premise of Semun, everyone is human, versus what's happening today in Haiti, to show you the depth of neo-colonization. So, and why it's even more ironic in the case of language is the fact that I like to think of Jean-Jacques Dessalines, which is our founding father, the one who led the army that won over Napoleon. So Jacques Dessalines, he understood back then, back in the 18th century, when he was fighting against Napoleon's army, he understood that on top of the power of the cannons, there was also the soft power of language and culture. He was clear about it. For example, this piece here that you see on the slide, this was reported by a French journalist called Decoloniality. So Decoloniality reports that there was a time when Dessalines was addressed in French by a so-called créole, meaning someone who was born in the colony, and he told them very clearly, tiens bien langue à vous, pour que vous approchez langue les autres, meaning that we have our language, we have our own language. Why look for the language of others? And the thing was clear. In fact, even in his speech that he gave on January 1st, 1804, to our independence speech, he said very clearly that, look, we were vanquished. We had been vanquished by the French, not only because of the army. We were vanquished by the French before our evolution because of the deceptive power of the language. He called it the perfidious French eloquence. Very, very, the thing is so far, he understood the soft power of language. And he wasn't alone. One of his contemporaries, General Etienne Eligérin, he wrote something actually which was quite striking. So in this quote here, he explains very clearly that Haiti will never be independent until we demystify the technology of the French language. I mean, that's 1807, and he used the term technology to describe the way the French language is used in Haiti. So he understood deeply how language can be used as a tool for power, for colonization, really. And actually, this topic is one that's so relevant for us today. Today, as we're facing this tragedy in Gaza, think about the technology of language, how it's been used to create this fog around truth. You see language being enlisted as a weapon for war, in this case, as a weapon in service of genocide. And that's another talk that we can give at some other point. But why I bring this up here is because we should not be, I have colleagues, linguists, who get very nervous when I talk about the power of language in struggles for liberation and decolonization. And when in 1807, General Gérin in Haiti understood that language is a technology for power. So why are we linguists today not being able to face the reality of how language is being used, even in today's tragedy in Gaza, as a tool for genocide? Okay, so that's on the side, but I had to make this aside because it's so important for us to understand the weight of hegemony, even as we linguists are trying to liberate ourselves and our people. Okay, so now let's go back to Sylvain. So I think now I hope I've laid you enough of a context to understand the milieu in which Sylvain was evolving and what she was trying to achieve back then and what we today are still trying to achieve in terms of decolonization and liberation. Okay, so to continue that, so now we're going to look at Sylvain's contribution in linguistics and creole studies under the weight of hegemony. Okay, so always remember that we're going to look at what she accomplished as a linguist, but we also have to think about the limitations. But the limitations we have to understand where they're coming from, and they're coming from the power of white supremacy. Okay, and again, think of us today as we operate as scholars. What do we have to negotiate on our campuses, in our offices, with our colleagues, when we're trying to liberate our fields and ourselves from the weight of hegemony? And then what I'm going to do is to look at the history of these mental chains that Sylvain had to deal with, and that some of us still have to deal with today in the 21st century, even myself here at MIT. And then we'll talk about the last part, which will be brief, and I'm glad to see that I have some team members on the Zoom here, like Grenadier Jerid, Jean-Baptiste. So we at MIT, we're trying to produce this salt, because in Haiti we have this thing that it's salt that can wake up the zombies. So if someone is being zombified, you need to give them salt to wake them up. And so I like to think of MIT Haiti as helping produce that salt that will wake up the zombies that have been zombified under the weight of white supremacy through language and education. Okay, so this is the plan for what's coming ahead. So now let's look at Sylvain's most famous book. Maybe it's the most famous linguistic book, because she has other books about women in Kinshasa, about Haitian tales. But for me as a linguist, this is a main contribution to my field. So we're going to look at that a bit, and we're going to use this, again, as I said earlier, as a prism to understand our current struggles today as scholars interested in language, education, issues of identity, issues of liberation and decolonization, okay? So what I'll do first is to show you the impact of Sylvain's book in linguistics, and then we'll look at some of the limitations that emerge from his own struggles with white supremacy. So first we look at the praise, okay? And the praise here is well-deserved, extremely well-deserved. So I'll just give you a sample. I mean, I could show you much more. And thanks to Jean Jonassin, my colleague, Professor Jean Jonassin at Syracuse, there's a beautiful collection of Suzanne Sylvain, her husband, Jean Comhaire, the letters, the writings, the manuscripts. And so many of these documents are found from the archives, which are at Stanford, of Suzanne Sylvain's and Jean Comhaire's collection. Okay, so this is a praise from linguist from Colombia, Maurice Goodman, writing in '64. And deservedly, he says that Sylvain's book was one of the finest study of any Creole language at that particular time. In fact, it was the first time that there was any such detail on any Creole language anywhere in the world. So this is really monumental. You know, a book is really a treasure trove. And then on husband, actually, very, very sweet. He had his own review of his wife's book. And of course, I mean, he's biased, of course, and he's biased actually in very interesting ways. And I picked one sentence in his review of his wife's book, and this review this one sentence is very telling, because in one sentence he explains the paradigm shift that Sylvain was trying to usher in that book. Okay, and it's a paradigm shift along perhaps 3 dimensions, right? The first one is the idea that back then, Creole languages, they were not worth studying, because they were not viewed as bona fide, valid, full-fledged, respectable languages. They were viewed as broken French, and he says that, back then, Creoles were viewed as being, quote unquote, exceptions to the rules. Actually, I've coined this term that I called Creole exceptionalism. And I was interested to see that back in the 30s, Jean Comhaire understood that, he even used that idea that Creoles were not exceptions to the rules. If I didn't know about this this letter I found in the archives, and it's called Hommage à ma femme, homage to my wife, and he clearly understood that there was this dogma that Creole are quote unquote exceptional languages. Okay, so, and then the third paradigm shift was against the view that Creole are childish language, over simplistic, over simple, or simplest languages. And interestingly, this notion of Creoles being simple languages is one that a living linguist called John McWhorter even used it in the title of one of his articles. He says that no, Creole languages have the simplest grammars in the world. You know, so the idea, you see, the idea that Jacques Comhaire was talking about going back in the 30s, you know, the idea that, you know, Sylvain argued in a book that Creoles are not, you know, childish languages. This idea is still around. You have linguists who are still publishing. We have whole quote unquote debates. I don't, you know, I don't take part anymore in these debates because they are so waste of time. But that idea of Creoles being simple is still very much alive. And according to Jacques Comhaire, very passionate review of his wife's work, he says, no, Sylvain showed that these three ideas do not hold. And we have to ask, we'll be asking, did Sylvain manage to accomplish these three goals? And we'll see. Now, what I also found actually, and I found this in the exhibit at UNESCO, this letter that sociologist Laniek Urbon wrote after Sylvain's death. And this is an amazing homage by sociologist, Haitian sociologist Laniek Urbon for Sylvain. And he hits it right on the nail. He talks about how really Sylvain's book was a counterattack against French neocolonialism via language. Because what he says is that while in 36, when Sylvain published that book, Haitian Creole was considered a simple, bastardized derivative of the French language. Comhaire-Sylvain, Suzanne Sylvain, worked to show the importance of the African contribution in the formation of Haitian Creole. And he says that, you know, as a consequence, her work carried out with much rigor showed that it was showing that, you know, the offensive of French imperialism hidden behind the label francophonie had to be dismissed, right? Because the notion that Creole was a variety of French, he called it, was a Siamese sister of the French language. That notion the goal was to exclude Creole from avenues of knowledge and power, right? And basically, according to Urbon, what Sylvain accomplished is to oppose this Francophile propaganda that is still dominant in Haiti. Now, this is the point that's important. Urbon says that this Francophile propaganda is still dominant in Haiti after almost 1 century that Sylvain wrote a book, you see, because the goal of that propaganda is to assimilate the Haitian people to French culture. Okay, so this is Urbon's review, and very important one. Now, interestingly, even as Sylvain was publishing a book in 1936, she had her own cousin called Jules Fenn, the author of the book that you see here called Philologie Créole. So at the same time that Sylvain was trying to argue that Haitian Creole is really an African language with French words, her cousin, Jules Fenn, was publishing this book calling Creole a Neo-Romance language, basically a French language derived from langue d'oil by way of Old Norman, Picard, Angevin, and Poitevin. You know, so basically, the idea is that Creole is really French with some, actually, it says, with a limited influence from African languages. Okay. Now, what's fascinating is that Comhaire, Suzanne Sylvain sorry for so this is from the archive, so it might not be very readable, but I'll tell you what's there. So Comhaire, writing about this struggle, this fight between Suzanne Sylvain and her own cousin, Jules Fenn, he says that, you know, the problem is that the Haitian elite found it too much to bear that the Creole, even though the elite would speak Creole, you know, to their maids, they would use it for jokes, they wouldn't take it for something serious. But even then, the idea that Haitian Creole would be African would be insulting to them, because this is the degree to which Haitians, the elite Haitians, considered Africans. For them, Africans were such low people that they couldn't accept the view from Sylvain that Creole grammar was really African grammar, right? And interestingly enough, right? And now what Comhaire goes on to say is that, Jules Ferry spent the rest of his life fighting Sylvain's proposal, according to Comhaire. And what's interesting is that Sylvain's work did not get recognized at that time by the French, but Jules Ferry's work, guess what? It got a major award from what? From the Académie Française, right? An interesting thing to see that the Académie Française put its weight behind Jules Ferry against Sylvain. Okay, so now one thing we're going to ask is about the history, the intellectual history of Sylvain's book, Créole haïtien, Morphology and Syntax. And one, there's a lot to say, but I'm going to just try to highlight some interesting points in the history of that book. So in a way, one can say, well, what Suzanne Sylvain did in a book is to answer her father's question. So her father, someone else that I admire, what he did to show the power of the Creole language, of Haitian Creole, what he did was to translate La Fontaine's fables it wasn't just a simple translation. He really adapted in Creole the famous fabulist Jean La Fontaine into Creole, and he called that translation Cric Crack, right? And his point was straightforward. He said, how can children be reading the fables from a French author, and often those fables from La Fontaine, they refer to animals that Haitian children will never see in their lives. So, and yet they have to study those fables in French. He said, well, I want, my children, I want Haitian children to be able to understand those fables from their own perspective, as rooted in Haitian life and Haitian culture. But then he also said, in the preface of this translation of La Fontaine's fable, he asked, is Creole a language? Is Creole a patois? And he goes on to say that, no one disputes that Creole is a derivative of French. But can we recognize that Creole has its own originality? Can we recognize that Creole has its own qualities, finesse and elegance? And then it says that, what we should do is maybe to produce in Creole to show the importance of the language. And yeah, this belief that we need to use Creole in education. That was back in the 1901. Again, this is quite inspiring to see that. And then what we could also think of Sylvain's work now, looking at more of the scientific contribution that Sylvain made, and we're going to now focus on this notion that she made very popular, which many linguists after her have taken up, the idea that the Creole language, in the case of in the Caribbean, has the grammar of an African language with words derived from a European language, right? Now, first, let's look at the actual data in Sylvain's book. Actually, Sally Coco-Moufuene, Sally gave a talk yesterday at the Collège de France, and in that talk, he did mention Sylvain's work, including Sylvain's conclusion that Haitian Creole is A-way grammar with French words. And he said something very, very interesting, which I think is true, which is that most linguists who quote that conclusion, that Haitian Creole is A-way grammar with French words, they probably never read Sylvain's book. Because if they did read Sylvain's book, they would be more cautious about citing this conclusion as if Sylvain believed in that conclusion. Because in fact, if someone does read Créole haïtien, which I recommend to all Creolists, what you'll find, actually all linguists and all folks interested in anthropology, ethnography, etc., because it's a very interesting book in terms of those connections between Haiti, Africa, and Europe. So first of all, what she says is, so there, she makes a connection between the Creole verbal system in terms of how the verb is accompanied with what linguists call markers for tense, mood, and aspect, and those are separate words. So we say things like moins T ap danser. So T is the past marker, ap is the progressive marker, meaning I was dancing. In French, you would say something like je dansais, where the verb has the suffixes that express both the imperfect and the past, the past and also other features like person and number marking. But in Creole, you don't have that. What you have the verb, and you have those words coming before the verb that are separate from it. Moi, t'es, ap dansé. T is the past, ap is the progressive, meaning I was dancing. And she says that the common use in Creole of this construction, which are called periphrastic construction, is found in all hybrid dialects. And she made this point that's interesting. It's also found in children's language. Remember that idea that her husband was saying that Sylvain's work is going to jettison the view that Creole is a childish language. But look, she makes a connection here between the Creole structures with children's language. And then she said, well, and then it's also found in African languages. So she makes this connection between those constructions in French, in Creole, both with childish language and African language. Now, keep that in mind, because that's where we're going to see a struggle, intellectual struggle in Sylvain's mind between her wanting to be anti-colonial and Afrocentric versus her crumbling under the weight of the mission civilisatrice. The idea that Europe's cultures and languages are superior to African cultures and languages. And now, again, and that, for me, this is the part of the book that I most like, is when she compares, she has those fine comparisons between Haitian Creole grammar and both Ewe, or Be, if you will, and French grammars. Okay, so here, for example, because of time, I'm going to go a bit faster now. So what she shows there is she picks particular markers, words in Creole grammar, and then what she does very carefully is to connect them with both French and Ewe analogs. And she does it, actually one could dispute some of the details, but the data are very interesting, and the intent is very clear, right? To show that there's kind of convergence between certain features in Ewe and features in French, and they kind of converge in the grammar of Haitian Creole. Now she does the same with markers like, I told you earlier about the marker T. If you look at item B here, in item B, what she talks about is the fact that this marker T for the past is connected to the French participle, été. So in French, you have this été marker, and which in Creole becomes te, and they both can be used in constructions that express the past. And she even says that there are even some dialects in France, like in Picardy, where the marker is actually te, exactly like in Haitian Creole, right? So this is very precise for analysis, showing these connections between Creole, Ewe, and French. And now I want to bring you back to the present. So this is because I want to show you that Sylvain's approach as a linguist, in fact, has been validated by modern linguistics. So this is a paper in Nature in the, I don't remember the exact date, but it's in the 2020s, roughly, in 21st century. And so the point of this paper is to argue against the very popular view that Creole languages are quote unquote exceptional, what I've called in my own writing, Creole exceptionalism. And that is that Creoles are exceptional because they emerge through a catastrophic break of transmission. And therefore, because of this break in transmission, structures from the languages in contact could not be passed down to the Creole. That's what makes Creoles all similar and all exceptional and all simplest. But this paper in Nature uses what I call big data, meaning huge amount of data against the big dogmas of Creole exceptionalism. And the conclusion is very clear that in fact, in the history of Creole languages, what you see is that grammars from the languages that were in contact are indeed transmitted in the grammars of the Creole languages. And that's exactly what the data in Suzanne Sylvain's book in 1936 showed very clearly, right? So it's something to keep in mind that, in fact, Sylvain was very avant-garde. She was ahead of her time in actually already showing that this hypothesis did hold, right? So now we've shown, the major contributions of Sylvain's work. Now let's talk about the limitations. And again, we have to contextualize these in the thinking about the weight of white supremacy among colleagues, among a family, as he was producing this book. So there are a number of problematic statements she makes in that book. For example, she says that all Haitians are more or less bilingual. So the idea is that all Haitians speak both Creole and French. Now, it's an empirical issue. Is that true? Right? And then she goes on to try to explain, yes, maybe some of them don't speak French fluently, but they all speak French. They are more or less bilingual. Now, having worked in Haiti in many places, and I think many of us here, if you've been to Haiti, one would be very surprised about this statement. Where was she? What data did she use to make that claim? And the only way one can really try to make sense of this claim is if one were to assume that maybe she believed that there are some forms of Creole that basically are French, that some forms of Creole are basically impure French, right? That's the only way that statement could hold, that all Haitians are more or less bilingual, only if some ways of speaking Creole would qualify as French, right? And that alone is problematic. And I'm going to show you why such belief might have a reason in Sylvain's way of thinking. Another thing that's also problematic is this notion that she argued for at the very end of the comparisons in the book, that Creole is an African language, an Ewe language with French words. So where did that come from? Well, let's focus a bit on the history of this claim, right? So what she says that, when Creole was emerging, on the one hand, there was French, actually a simplified French that the colonists used to speak to the enslaved Africans. And on the other hand, there were this multitude of African languages having almost the same grammatical structure, also a very simple structure, right? So she's assuming that whether you speak a Bantu language or a Kwa language, actually these are languages with very different structures. So in Bantu, you have what's called lots of suffixes and prefixes that can pile up in the same word. You don't seem to have that in Kwa. They seem to have very different structures. But in Sylvain's perspective, all African languages have the same grammatical structure. Not only that, they also have a very simple structure. And look, and what does she cite? She cites this language called I don't know how to pronounce the last name, Midjord. And that linguist, I read some of his work. He was a clear supremacist. He deeply believed that Africans had inferior minds. And she cites Midjord as support for a claim, saying that, why you have this mismatch between the syntax of Creole and the words, because Asian Creole takes the syntax from the Africans, and the Africans, because of the quote unquote low mental powers, they can only produce very simple and very similar structures, right? So basically at the root of the hypothesis that Creole is Ewe syntax with French words, at the root of there is a belief in the inferiority of Africans, right? Which is very, very striking, given a stated desire to valorize Haitian Creole. So again, I put here the conclusion that she came up with, in presence of an Ewe language with French words. And just, to give you a bit of contemporary history, that claim that Sylvain made in 1936 has been very, very, very productive in many theoretical circles. And so here I'm showing you the book cover from Claire Lefebvre, a linguist in Canada. And Claire Lefebvre, a main claim to fame was basically to substantiate empirically Sylvain's thesis, the idea that indeed Haitian Creole is African grammar with French words. She didn't clearly stated that she was doing that, but in fact, her claim is basically that every aspect of Haitian Creole syntax can be connected to the grammar of the Bay language, Fong Bay, which is also an Ewe language, and with the words derived from French. And she got one of the most generous grants in Canada for trying to prove that claim, which I've argued against, because actually it's quite straightforward to show that this claim does not hold, right? And I'm going to use an example that's quite, easy to understand. If Haitian Creole had the grammar of a Bay language of Ewe, you would expect, for example, that grammar to be observable in word order, in how, for example, you say something like, I eat rice. So this is how you say I eat rice. In Bay, you have the order subject, verb, object, what linguists call SVO, I eat rice. But then there's something interesting that happens in the Bay languages. Actually, it's also quite common in the supra family, in the Kwa languages, which is that when you use an auxiliary like a progressive marker, if you want to say, I am eating rice, now there's something interesting that happens. You switch the order between the object and the verb. You say, I be eat rice, and you have a marker at the end. But what's clear here is that it's in big syntax, whenever you use this progressive marker, you have to switch the order of the object and the verb. You don't say eat rice, you say rice eat. But guess what? In Haitian Creole, you don't have that. In Haitian Creole, you always have the order verb object. You say moi manger du riz, and you say moi ap manger du riz. You don't say moi ap du riz manger. So this is a straightforward, clear example that this hypothesis doesn't hold. And of course, I've done work with my colleague Enoch Abo, which I'll mention a bit later, where we do show that there are parts of Haitian Creole grammar that are influenced by the Bay languages, but you cannot say that the entire grammar is derived from Bay. Now, why should Sylvain make such a spectacular claim that contradicts her own data? Well, she actually said why, because apparently, now this is from late Creolist John Home in his book on Creoles and Pidgins. He asked that question, where did Sylvain come up with this conclusion? And what apparently Sylvain reported to one of the contemporaries is that this was not her own opinion, but that of a mentor who had required that she put that conclusion at the end of the book. So basically, now what we have to do, a bit of archaeology, is to try to find out, okay, because she didn't name the mentors. And it looks like, John Home, in quoting Robert Hall Jr., didn't mention who the mentor was. But actually, if you read Sylvain's book, at the very beginning, there's a very nice acknowledgement. She says, to my dear teacher, Mademoiselle Lilias Homburger, in testimony of my admiration and my gratitude. So the most likely candidate as a mentor is a advisor, Elias Hamburger. And interestingly, if you look up Elias Hamburger's work, she did lots of work on African languages. And this was actually one of her major hypotheses, that African languages share similar grammar. And not only you have similarity of grammar among African languages, but that similarity extends to even Dravidian languages spoken in India, like Hindi, like a language called Kannada. And then she even made the claim that, you could even connect African languages to Basque in Europe, in Spain. So then, and she was a very well-known linguist. She was even the professor of someone like Leopold Sédar Senghor, So at the same time that Hamburger was advising Suzanne Sylvain, she was also advising Leopold Sédar Senghor. Now, who else? And this gets interesting when you ask yourself, who else were the mentors of Suzanne Sylvain? Among her mentors, you find well-known anthropologist Melville Herskovits. And one of Melville Herskovits' major items in his agenda for research is to show that basically, he called it the myth of the Negro past. And his point was to show that the Negro in the US, that's what they called it the Negro. So now we would use terms like African Americans in the US. They did not have an empty past. They had a very rich cultural past coming directly from Africa, right? So it was clear that for someone like Herskovits was also inspiring Suzanne Sylvain, that one way to counter racism in the US, one way to counter this view that Blacks were inferior, is to connect the culture of Black folks to cultures in Africa, which was a very, a well-expected and reasonable move, right? And he goes on to say that, look, in Africa we have organizations that have contributed to American culture, and this is something that we should be proud of, right? And he goes on to argue that this measure, this approach, would undermine racial prejudice, right? So again, these are very valuable approaches to anthropology and linguistics, trying to counter racism by science. So on the one hand, you have scientific racism, and on the other hand, you have scientific anti-racism in the work of folks like of Herskovits, right? And in the same vein, like Sylvain, he argued that basically the language of Black Americans in the US, African American English, is basically the grammar of African languages with the vocabulary of English, right? So you see, the connection between Sylvain's views about Haitian Creole and the views of these scholars on African American English, right? Now let's look at another type of mentorship that might have influenced Sylvain, because clearly what we see now is that Sylvain, although she was anti-colonial, but she did hold French and European values and cultures as being higher than those of Africans. And where might have this come from? And here, this is from her own family. So this is, some of you might know Benito Sylvain. He was very well known as an early Pan-Africanist. He worked in Ethiopia. He was a collaborator of the king of Ethiopia, the emperor of Ethiopia, back in the late 19th, early 20th century. But even as he wrote his book, and the book was about showing the racism of colonization, but yet he himself accepted the idea that colonization is a good thing, right? What he says is that it's a natural phenomenon. The same way that people migrate, well, countries also migrate, and countries' migration becomes colonization. It's a normal phenomenon. And then he goes on that, if you're a powerful country, it's a good investment. You need to engage in colonization, right? And then, so the same Benito Sylvain, which is the uncle of Suzanne Sylvain, look at this paragraph, right? Again, he assumes that colonization is a good thing, but to colonize well, you have to civilize well. You have to believe in this mission civilisatrice, in this white man's burden, which is to share your superior culture with the inferior culture of the colonized. Very, very clear that like the goal of colonization, if it's done well, is to civilize and assimilate. And we find the same. I'm going to go very quickly through these slides because of time. One of the mentors that Suzanne Sylvain looked up to, Jean-Pierre Mars, very well-known Haitian anthropologist. When someone he's been even called one of the founders of the Negritude movement with Aimé Césaire and others. He wrote this book on the vocation of the elite. And in this book, again, he refers to African languages as being rude and barbaric. And then he goes on to say that, the way that we're going to save ourselves is through assimilation. Because through assimilation, those poor enslaved Africans can raise themselves up to the level of the superior culture of Africa. And what I find really fascinating is that Jean-Christ Mars, when I first learned of him when I was a school child, many years ago, I learned of him as being someone who defended Africa and Haiti, who wanted Haitians to be proud of having African ancestry. And in fact, that's right, because, for example, his famous book, So Spoke the Uncle, Ainsi Parla l'Oncle, he starts with the premise that, look, we Haitians, we've been mistaken to see ourselves as brown Frenchmen. We should stop seeing ourselves as brown Frenchmen. He calls it actually, it's collective Bovarism, seeing ourselves as what we are not. To become fully ourselves, we have to accept our African heritage. But at the same time, sorry for the font size, but I'll tell you what he's saying there. As he's arguing that Haitians should stop being brown Frenchmen, he's also arguing that basically, our Creole language, although it's very important for our identity, but yet, its origins are embedded in this hierarchy of superior languages, in this case, French varieties, and the lower, what he called the multiple, harsh, and inharmonious idioms of multitudes of individuals belonging to tribes collected from all sides of Africa and imported into the furnace of Salomeng. You see, and he talks about Creole being primitive in many ways, but it has still a beautiful sonority, etc. So, and he also recognizes that it's thanks to Creole that we have these rich oral traditions. Okay, and he understands that Creole has to be used if we want to bridge the gap between the elite and the masses, right? So you can see what we call in Haiti, mi wo mi ba, the ambivalence. You go up and down in terms of valuing Creole, valuing Africa, and at the same time despising Creole and despising Africa, right? So this gives you the lay of the land in terms of the milieu of Suzanne Sylvain. And then, so here, this is more of the same, where here, this paragraph is just extolling the beauty of French culture and how it's a culture that we should all aspire to, and because we are indebted to France, for this beautiful spiritual heritage. And he invites Haitians, to fulfill the destiny to carry French culture in the Caribbean. Okay, so to make a long story short, what we're seeing here, we have these mental chains even around the most anti-colonial or decolonial intellectuals in Haiti in this period of the 20th century, right? And my point here is very straightforward. The origins of these mental chains are in the metal chains, right? And with more time, I would go into the details of basically how these views about Creoles and about African languages, how they emerge directly from this power knowledge regimens that Foucault has so well described. But the point is that, to make it open very quickly, in order for Europe to justify its domination over Africans, it had to use knowledge, it had to use science or scientific criticism as a tool for power. Okay, so one objective of that kind of science, scientific criticism, was to use, say, linguistics or anthropology to prove that the Africans were lower humans. So linguistics itself had to prove that African languages were at a lower level and it reflects of the lower humanity of the Africans. And that's the only way that the Christians, civilized Europeans, could accept the fact that they were treating the Africans as chattels, as basically furniture, right? And this is basically the root for those bizarre theories about languages that we still find today in articles being published today by linguists, although there is, like Mufwene said yesterday in Collège de France, you can see, now, thanks to, again, the guiding light of scholars like Federico Mufwene, there's more pushback and there's more of a, what we call a uniformitarian approach to languages that view them as just normal languages. But we shouldn't be surprised, right, about the fact that indeed languages can be used as tools for power alongside linguistics. And this goes back, again, to give you the power of languages across centuries. We can cite, Nebrija, for those of you who study Spanish linguistics, in 1492, so Nebrija gave the Spanish grammar to the Queen of Spain, Isabella, and he told her very bluntly, look, this grammar, linguistics, will be your tool, will be your weapon to conquer the Americas. And we find the same among the British in India, right? That English is going to be the superior language, and even claim that Sanskrit, all the literature in Sanskrit is inferior to basic nursery rhyme books in England. It's kind of an amazing claim. And we find the same closer to us now in Haiti among the French. The French clearly look, the economic power of France is going to rely on the hegemony, on the superiority of the French language through Francophonie, right? And we could go on and on, but I want to show you quickly that these views have even influenced the thinking of well-known intellectuals in Haiti, like Filme, one of the best-known scholars in the history of Haiti. Even Filme was, strongly, strenuously anti-colonial. He even wrote a book against this notion of Blacks being inferior. He wrote a book on the equality of human races to respond to a book on the inequality of human races, right? But yet the same Filme who argued for the equality of human races. He also said that, look, for the Haitians to evolve mentally, they have to give up Creole and they have to speak French. You see, and now to bring you back to the 21st century, what you see, UNESCO itself, the very UNESCO that hosted us recently to celebrate Suzanne Sylvain, they too fall in that trap of Creole Hispanism. So this is a survey that UNESCO was distributing a couple of years ago, and luckily, there was some pushback, including pushback from the ambassador Dupuis of UNESCO, of representing Haiti at UNESCO. And that survey, if you look at the boxes to be checked in terms of what language does your nation speak, so there is long, right? Long. And then as a separate category, there is Creole language and Pidgin language. So it's as if, there is a category of languages that are languages, and then outside of that, there is Creole, and there are Pidgins, and there are mixed languages, etc. Right? So again, with the clear entailment that Creoles are outside of the normal language family, and that's UNESCO. Okay. Now, in terms of data, I need to close very quickly because I'm getting too excited about this. So I'm much of a time now. But I just want to show you that if you want a nice overview that might show you that all these claims about Creoles being exceptional and being inferior because of their history, they're all wrong. And one way to quickly do it, looking at maps, which is, in fact, I'm borrowing this from Mufwene, is to say compare the history of Romance. So Romance languages, Catalan, Spanish, Italian, etc., they all evolve in the context of language contact and migration, right? So when Latin migrated into Northern Europe and got into contact with quote unquote barbaric languages like Germanic and Celtic, that's how you got French to emerge. French emerged out of the contact between Latin and Germanic and Celtic. And the same is true for the various Romance languages. And the same is true as well for the history of say, Creole languages. They emerge in the very same context of migration and language contact. And then, so Sadi Coco gave that lecture just yesterday. So please, if you want to, if you speak French, and because he gave it in French, you can go to his lecture and you'll get more data. It's on YouTube about this anti-colonial approach to Creole languages. And then you can, in English, you can also look at some of my own work. So I've taken this claim of Sylvain to task in a very detailed way in this article that was published now, 20 years ago or so, looking at really in detail the claims being made about Haitian Creole being a syntax with French words, and I've shown that it just doesn't hold. And then you'll see more recent work with my colleague Enoch Abo, who actually speaks a Bay language. And we've done some very detailed comparisons in various domains to show that, in fact, Creole languages are just normal languages, no need for any exceptionalism in the approach. And then what I want to end with is that, any effort to exclude students' native languages from the classroom based on the notion that they are somehow inferior, or it's best to learn a quote unquote world language. So all those claims are based on the same racist ideology, basically white supremacy, that Suzanne Sylvain, like her father, Georges Sylvain, like they were fighting against in the writing. Because if you go back to the 17th century, this is what I do here with René Descartes, he said very clearly, so Descartes said very clearly that that why he wrote this book, which is actually a very important book on philosophy and science, he did it in French, not in Latin, which is the language of his professors. He did it because he wanted his compatriots to all understand science. And he knew that if he had to done it in Latin, which back then was the formal language of education, then they couldn't understand. So he decided to write it in what he called the vulgar language, meaning the vernacular language, because he wanted to make sure that everyone could understand. So back in the 17th century, this was understood, that if you want to understand, you use the native language. And now Sylvain, Suzanne Sylvain's father, Georges Sylvain, when he produced this book of tales from La Fontaine, Cric Crac, he was very Cartesian, right? He said very clearly that we need Creole as language of instruction, you see? And Sylvain herself, Suzanne Sylvain, she produced also this beautiful book on Haitian tales. And that book is part of this canon showing, again, the beauty and power of Creole and how it should be used in education. And myself as a linguist, before I get to that point, I want to show something about what Sylvain's history. I mean, one thing that Sylvain says very clearly, and I think we need to keep that in mind, is that a work producing those tales, Haitian tales in that book, she owes it to no one else but what her husband called her little maid, Anise. So in that text that you see here, basically she thanks the monolingual Creole speaker, maid Anise, and she makes this beautiful point that Anise helped her stay alive because she was sick when she was 1 year and a half and she couldn't eat. And one way that she got to survive that sickness is through a maid who was a Creole speaker telling her those tales from the Haitian rural area. And those tales basically kept her alive because when she heard those tales, they were so good that she wanted to eat. And so Amis would feed her while telling her those tales. So basically, she got fed both by actual food, but also by the Creole language. So it's important to stress that because Amis is one of those people who probably would never make it into our circles as an intellectual, but Amis is what actually helped her produce the Conte haïtien. And then she also has a book on proverbs, and there's one proverb which I like a lot, which is chaudier qui cuit manger, pas qu'à al sous table, meaning the pot that cooks the food doesn't go on the dining table. But actually, the point that I want to make here is that in fact, Creole is the chaudier for Haiti that cooks the food, that cooks our identity, that cooks our culture, and it should go on the table. And in fact, when she gives credit to Amis, that's exactly what she does. She's saying that, look, we can take the Creole speaker and give her the dignity that she deserves as a Creole speaker without French. And then to end, this is a screenshot from one of my work with Enoch Abo, and where you should clearly that we give Sylvain our gratitude for having started this amazing project on documenting and analyzing Haitian Creole. And before we end, I want to actually just a couple of weeks ago, Thierry Jean-Baptiste, one of our team members in MIT Haiti, we gave this talk about the importance of Haitian Creole in multilingual education. And what we argued for is that what we're doing at MIT Haiti, very much along the lines of Sylvain's approach in the 30s, is to go anti-colonial, is to use language education in our battle for decolonization and liberation. Very important. And we're very grateful to our senior colleagues, like, for example, Jean Casimir, and I know that Jean Casimir was here in this forum, so I want to end by recalling Casimir's very important work on the decolonial history of Haiti, because what we're doing at MIT Haiti, and I invite you to take a look at our platform, we're trying to really take Sylvain's dream into reality by producing materials that not only use Creole, but that also goes we're counter plantation, that valorize our culture, our identity, what we look like, what we sound like. So I invite you to take a look at platform MIT Haiti. So thank you for being so patient. I went way over time, but I got excited. So sorry.
Thank you so much for your presentation, Professor DeGraff. I would now like to invite Professor Makoni, who will engage in a conversation with you. Right after that, we'll go to our Q&A session. Professor Makoni, over to you.
Yes, thanks a lot, Michel. When you were talking, what was going through my mind was following question. That was a question directed to myself. I was sort of saying to myself, who in the African people who write in African linguistics, African languages, who would be my equivalent of Suzanne Sylvain? In other words, right. The way you have articulated this case, I think each one on this call must go and discover their own Suzanne Sylvain. That if we are going to develop this sort of decolonial framework that we are doing, we need to be able to identify some of these scholars who have had a major impact, but whose work has not been celebrated, right? And we have done it very, very well in terms of using Sylvain. And what you have done, which is very interesting, is from listening to you, have operated at two different levels, is very interesting, is how she was clearly ahead of her own time. Right. And that I thought was really interesting. But at the same time, you have also been able to illustrate the extent to which white supremacy and the ideas that float around us also limited what she could be able to say and write. So in other words, this is the sort of very interesting contradiction that you were pointing out about her. Highly astute politically, but at the same time constrained by the politics of white supremacy. That I thought was quite interesting. Then what I thought also, the question that I wanted to ask you was, but you then I think answered it a bit. Why was she so obsessed with French? For example, yes, she would say, oh yes, I mean, Creoles are every languages with French, but it looked like she needed French as a point of comparison, point of analysis, as if she couldn't do an analysis and write about Haitian Creole without foregrounding French. Methodologically, why did she think it was necessary to bring French every time into the arguments she was making?
Okay, that's a good question. So basically, I'll give you a quick answer. Basically, because she was a good linguist. That's why. She was a good linguist, and anyone who starts studying Haitian Creole, you'll start noticing that most of the Haitian Creole vocabulary, at the very least, no matter what your views are about the history of the language, no matter what your favorite hypothesis is, you cannot avoid the fact that the majority of Haitian words are derived, at the very least, in the phonetic shapes, the way they sound, from French. So if you're going to try to explain, which was one of her objectives in the book is try to understand the formation of Haitian Creole. How did it get to be the way it is?
Yeah.
Then you cannot escape a comparison with French. It's like, talking about the history of French and not wanting to look at Latin, or the history of English and not wanting to look at Germanic. I don't think she had any other. She had no choice.
No other option to.
No, because it's very striking. So anyone here can just open up the Haitian Creole dictionary and the French dictionary, and you can go word by word, looking at the Haitian entries. If you pronounce it loud, the correspondence is very, very striking. What I find more interesting myself is the fact that even when sometimes the resemblance is almost identical, like for example, if you take a small word like pas, which is negation, it sounds exactly the same as French pas. You see, what I've done in my work as a linguist is to try to understand, although you have this phonetic identity, pas and pas in Creole, pas in French, but do they have the same syntax? And interestingly, you see, but interestingly, they don't have this, the syntax and semantics are different in very interesting ways. You see, but to do that work, you have to be able to compare pas and pas. If you don't do that,
That leads me then to the question that I wanted to ask. Yes, there may be these similarities. For example, let's say, non-formally educated Haitian speakers of Creole, those similarities don't matter to them.
Yeah, I agree.
Those similarities. So what is interesting here, in a way, is yes, the similarities may be important at an intellectual level, but let's say for another group of people, you made a very powerful argument that the majority of people in Haiti will speak Haitian Creole. For that group of people, the similarities with France are completely secondary.
Until they have to learn French, which is the case for all Haitians go to school. They eventually, even in 2023 and 24, the curriculum makes it's really central to the curriculum. They actually, now it's better. Before they had to learn in French, even before they learn French. Now at least there is the recognition that they have to first learn French before they can learn in French. But if you have to learn French and eventually learn in French, you need to understand that the pas in Creole is not identical to the pas in French. You need to understand that a word like vivant in Creole, although it sounds exactly like the French word vivant, but it has different semantics. In fact, I have actually examples of kids and even teachers, if they fail to understand that the Creole vivant and the French vivant means alive, living. And the French vivant, although they sound the same, they're not identical in the semantics. If you don't get that, then you're going to be in trouble.
You're going to be in trouble.
You're in trouble in court. You're going to be in trouble in many places. So it is important. It might not be primordial, but it is important if you're going to be learning French or in French to understand that there are these, what we call so there's a term in French, faux amis, false friends, that there are words that might sound as if they are the same, but they sound the same, but
completely different.
Exactly. So you need to understand that. So it's
you need to understand that.
It's not secondary. So in fact,
so what it means, therefore, is this: is that to some extent, I think in Haiti, like in any other form of post-colonial societies, there's also, I think, a youth variety of Haitian Creole that is that seeks to undermine, in quotes, the Haitian Creole that may be used or taught in schools. But you find, let's say, for example, in Southern Africa, you have these other urban youth vernaculars that have been created. So my suspicion is that even in Haiti, there will be some urban youth vernaculars of Creole. Right. Am I right there?
Well, So I think all languages you'll find variations across speakers, and
Yes, yeah.
one of the variables for variation is exactly that: is age,
Yes, yes.
is urban versus rural, is education level, gender. So absolutely. So there will be, so that all plays in looking at the
In looking at
variations
it. Yeah.
in
Okay.
Haitian Creole. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And then the last point I want to make, which I think I liked quite a lot, is when you were talking about these three different approaches that we may adopt, what you're calling a decolonial perspective, evidence-based perspectives, and collaboration between practitioners and policymakers. I thought, in actual fact, that to some extent nails it, because you need that cluster, right? You need all those three together.
Yeah.
Just a decolonial perspective on its own, without being evidence-based, whatever evidence means, but you also need collaboration with practitioners and policymakers in order to move the entire project forward. Yeah. Thanks
absolutely.
a lot. Thanks.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for
Thanks
the
a lot.
point. And the
Good. Yeah. Mfundo, there are a number of people who would like to jump in to talk about different aspects.
Yeah, okay. We'll now move on to our Q&A session. If you'd like to ask a question or make a comment, please use the raise hand function, or you can post your question on the chat. So we have one question from Tebucho. Yeah. So first, he thanks Dr. DeGraff for explaining of Creole development in Haiti. And his comment reads as follows. Haiti had a successful revolutionary beginning, but once it has fallen into hands of unscrupulous politicians and was helped by the US reinstate kleptocratic regime with its law and order. Now it has fallen into the hands of criminal gangs. It is persuasive that it is a failed state. Why should Haiti's social development be safeguarded by US or France together with their colonial languages to maintain stability, law, and order? Debejo, would you like to expand on that question, or Professor DeGraff, would you like to just take on this question as it is?
Yeah, but this is in the title to it,
yes.
It's a very
no, the last part was, why should it not? As a failed state, it risks for us to continue analyzing language and the rest. When the state is taken by criminals, it's no longer a state.
Yeah, you're making some very important points here. But I'll just question the notion of a failed state, because there's a way in which, in fact, there's a recent book by Johnson about this notion of a failed state. And I would argue against using this term, because there are ways in which Haiti is a very successful state for the people that you mentioned in the same question. For the US, for France, Haiti is a very successful state. And you can even go to the history of the relationship between Haiti and France, for example, or Haiti and the US. So if we had more time, I would have discussed this more. But in the 19th century, soon after Haiti became independent, Haiti was forced to repay to France the value of what France, quote unquote, lost in Haiti, including the value of the bodies of the enslaved Africans. So that debt amounted to what's between today at more than $21 billion. And if you consider opportunity costs, it could be more like that $100 billion. And Haiti had to pay this back. And then the US came in 1915 to occupy Haiti, and the US took over the payment of some of this debt. Right? So from that perspective, in fact, there was a long series in the New York Times called The Ransom that you can take a look at. From that perspective, Haiti is not a failed state. Haiti has actually, for the US, for Canada, for France, it has kind of succeeded, because even though we became independent in 1904, but the message that Haiti sent, the fact that enslaved Africans could revolt and get the freedom, there's a sense in which the US and France and Canada and out now there's a notion of a core group that basically rule Haiti. For these core group nations, they've managed to some degree to succeed in keeping control of Haiti's future. So what Haiti is fighting against today is we're trying to regain our sovereignty. You see, so when you think of the failed state, you might even think that it's a state that's still on its own because of the people there. But that quote unquote failure has been engineered at the very onset of Haitian history. And one sample of that is, which is quickly available to you by clicking the ransom New York Times, and you'll understand the mechanics that put Haiti in this hole of misery that we've been in now for a couple of centuries. You see, so yeah, so I would resist this term of failed state without questioning who and what and how that failure was engineered. You see, because if you look at that, then you'll see that to some degree it's been a success, but not for the Haitians. So, but thank you for the question though, because it raises this larger envelope in terms of geopolitics.
Yeah.
I see Arthur's hand is
Professor Yes.
T.
Dr.
You're muted.
You're muted.
You're muted.
Okay.
There you go.
Yes.
I can hear you now.
I wanted to make a quick comment. One of the things I thought, I thank you very much for that. It's job. I just want to say that. And this is a comment. As you were talking, I was thinking so much about the educational system in the U.S. during segregation. And I grew up where we had all Black schools. As a matter of fact, there were parallel white and Black school systems. And we had the Black superintendent who was over all of the Black schools, and he reported to the white superintendents. But the schools were all Black. Everybody in the school was Black. There were never any white people in the school except for very rare occasions and whatnot. But here's the thing. Often we think about the big problem, but there's more that needs to be included in the package. So obviously what you've been doing for years is on target. There's a huge, gigantic language problem in Haiti, and we all know what it is, so I don't need to go into that. But one of the things that happened when, let me back up. There's just so much going through my mind, it's very hard for me to bring it together and say it. Okay, the civil rights movement started in the Black schools, and this is often overlooked. The question is, why did it start in the Black schools? And one of the things I'm thinking is the Black education that Black students got in the Black schools. And what it was a package. We had the textbooks and the curricula that were given to us by the white establishment, but the teachers took them and they commented on the textbooks. They talked back to the textbooks. They slipped in Black literature among all of the Jane Austen and so on and so forth. So actually we got a Black-centered education on the sly. And it included what? Real Black history and real American history, race theory, colorism, political economy, the global system, and so on and so forth. And what I'm saying is, I would like to see in all of these decolonial situations a focus on the whole package in education, because students not only have to speak their language and learn self-esteem and so on and so forth, but all of that comes through the whole package. Understand the history, understand the political economy, understand what goes on with colorism and how it's tied to racism and so on and so forth. And it has to be part of the curriculum. I'll just give one quick example. I remember long ago when Mao was still alive, and I remember reading an article about an American English teacher who went to China and was lamenting the way they taught English in China, in Mao's China. And the lament was basically focused on the fact that in teaching English, they taught imperialism, neo-imperialism, political economy, ideology, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And what she couldn't understand, it happened to be a woman, is why they would do all of that mixed up teaching English. They should be teaching about Jack and Jill and what they do, and the dog, their pet, and when they go to the park and whatnot. But they were using English instruction to get across the whole package of ideas that kids needed to grow up with in order for them to work together with other Chinese and realize their destiny. So that's my comment.
Thank you, Arthur. This is, yeah, and I couldn't agree more with all you said, And actually, there's another question that Chanel asked. I see it in the
Yes.
chat. Is the link between language power and knowledge, and also looking at the curriculum that students are being introduced today, especially in history, and as you saw. As recently as last year, the textbooks on geography and history, even I can even go to my own textbook, which I still have, my history textbook. I was taught that I should, this is in the very preface of the book, I was taught to revere, to adore las casas. Do you imagine a Haitian kid being asked in the very preface of the history textbook that they have to adore las casas among other missionaries like Jean-Marie and others who basically saved the souls of Haitians without any mention, for example, of Jacques Dessalines or Toussaint Louverture. You see, so this was my history textbook, and you saw in one of the slides that some of the geography textbooks, the social science textbooks, they teach kids that European features and cultures are superior to African. So I agree, Arthur, that there has to be some major overhaul of the curriculum, and it goes beyond language. And that's one thing which I've been pushing the ministry to think about very closely. And I know that the current Minister of Education, Nesmi Maniga, is aware of this issue. So one thing that he's been doing, for example, in the past couple of years, is even introduce lyrics of popular songs in Creole in exams, to basically push the students to pay attention, not just to written literature, but also to look at all literature. And some of it is quite subversive. For example, there was one text from this singer that I know personally, Big Tison Diffé, in one of the exams of the baccalaureate. You see, and once students start to look at these texts produced by activists like Big Tison Diffé, for example, Kokorat, they will have to ask hard questions, including questions about the question from earlier from Teboho, the question about what's a failed state, right? And because one of Big Tison Diffé's songs, which so it was introduced in the curriculum through the exams, is exactly about the nature of the international aid, who funds the gangs, who profit from the gangs, and what's Haiti's future if we don't take a deep look at the ways in which there is this conspiracy between the Haitian elites, the Haitian politicians, and the international organizations, including US, Canada, France, that are profiting from Haiti's misery. You see? So there is an effort in place along these lines. It's still, we don't know where it's going to go, because each time a new government comes into place, we might have to take 2 steps back, as we've seen in the slides about the Bernard reform. But we have to keep pushing. And the thing is, with technology, and this is one thing that we're using in our platform, we know that our platform, the materials there are being used. More than half of the users are in Haiti, you see. And on our platform, we introduce very short text, for example, text by Suzanne Comhaire-Sylvain on this decolonial approach to history. We also, in fact, there's a lesson plan that Jean-Baptiste wrote, challenging this notion of race in Haiti and looking directly at this claim that you find in Haitian textbooks that there is a black race, there's a white race, and one can establish hierarchy of races. You see, and we're hoping that the materials are there, people are using them, and it will trigger questions, among the students. So it's almost like a guerrilla approach. You don't have any direct influence on the government, although we are trying to cultivate links with the Ministry of Education. But meanwhile, the materials are there, and some of them, for example, from Casimir, they're very sharp. They're very sharply anti-colonial, decolonial. So that's the hope. That's the strategy.
Yeah.
No.
I see Desmond has his hand up.
Yeah. Thank you, Michel, for this very insightful and inspiring session. I think, like Simfrey said, I'm now going to be thinking about who the Sylvians of my world could be.
Yeah.
I'd like to juxtapose 2 things that I think have emerged in the context of your presentation and the conversations that have followed as sort of possible future directions. The first, I think, takes me back to your reference to the technology of the French language. I think you were referring to someone who quite long ago was sort of thinking of the French language as a technology, right? And I think you insightfully noted that this is still going on today. This is not just something of the past. And on the other side, it seems to me, to follow your conversation with Professor Marconi, that there is this idea that we need to engage in decolonial thinking and decolonial praxis with also policy making. These 3 need to move together for us to begin to see, or at least enact, some changes. Now, as someone who has for years been quite suspicious of institutions, including institutions of the nation state, I want to prod you to see if you can say a bit more about the way that the technology is being operationalized here. That is, what does that technology look like then, and what does it look like today? And how does thinking of the French language, not just as a cultural symbol, but as a technology, how does that enter into the conversation about the possibilities of enacting change within the current infrastructure we have? Let me say maybe 1 or 2 more things. We're just talking about, the violence in Haiti right now. I don't know that Haiti manufactures guns. So it is very easy for us to get emotional about violence in Haiti, but until we begin to ask questions about the technologies of violence, how do transactions, communications, interactions operate underneath the surface level of that violence to make that violence possible, to produce and sustain that violence? If we don't pay attention to that undercurrent of that violence, we can speak all we want, we can say everything we want on camera and wherever. I don't think it's going to do much to change that. To also think about a Minister of Education, for instance, if we hope that the personal heroics of an individual minister who is in office today and is sympathetic to this idea will be enough to sort of destructure the institutions we are talking about, I wonder what lessons we can draw from this long history of thinking of language in technological terms. A Haitian president was assassinated. We never really get a full picture of how that happened. Even an American president sometimes was assassinated, right? So what is happening in the undercurrents of coloniality that manages time and time again to succeed in quelling dissent, in quelling even collaboration among well-intentioned people? And are there other ways we should be thinking about the possibilities of enacting change if we understand what is referred to there as the technology of the French language, or the technology of European language, the technology of European anything, the technologies of coloniality? Are there new ways we must begin to think about the possibilities of change beyond the formal institutions that we are familiar with, that we are often drawn to work with?
Yeah, this is a very, 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 very challenging question, this one. I totally hear you. Totally hear you. And on our team, we do often ask ourselves, where can we better push levers? You see, and since you mentioned technology, in fact, one of our lesson plans, I think maybe it was Jigid actually was here who worked on it. And it was actually inspired by a short piece that Jacques Casimir wrote about the use of technology for decoloniality. In fact, this one, you might want to take a look at it actually. And although it's in Creole, but because the Creole, if we can say so ourselves, is of very high quality, what you'd find is that if you take the link and you put it in Google Translate, you'll get a pretty accurate translation. It won't be 100%, but it will be pretty good. So if Jagid has a chance to pull up this the link to this lesson plan about the use of technology for decoloniality inspired by Casimir. So Casimir makes this point that, what's different, because you ask yourself, what's different now in Haiti versus in 1807 when Gérin talked about French as a technology. And the big difference that Casimir talks about is, yes, so Desmond, Jerry put the link in the chat. So what's different today is exactly that, the fact that we have something called WhatsApp that most Haitians, even those who might be barely literate, have access to. And what Casimir analyzes is the power of that technology in Creole, because if you go on any Haitian WhatsApp group, there'll be some exception. I know some WhatsApp groups that I'm on where I'm the only one who uses Creole on the WhatsApp group. Everybody else uses French or English. But most WhatsApp groups among Haitians use Creole, and those sometimes can be extremely efficient to organize. You see? So that's what gives Casimir's hope, the fact that now what he calls the sovereign people, he has this notion of the power and the beauty of the sovereign people, which he talked about when he spoke here a few weeks ago. So that power now is enhanced through communication technology like WhatsApp. And he gave examples where, for example, like there was this phenomenon called pays lock. Pays lock means literally country and the lock. And it's a way to protest against, for example, if there's going to be some election that you don't agree with the way it's being organized, or if you want to get a prime minister out, like what happened recently. But actually, the recent one was it was different from the previous ones. So you put the country in the lock. And what Casimir noticed as a sociologist is that the way it happens often is through WhatsApp. You have this very, very efficient WhatsApp group, so people send each other's message, and before you know, in the space of 24 hours, the country is on the lock. People are on the street, all businesses have to be closed, and it's an amazing way to put pressure on the government or on some other agents to make change. So so that's maybe, in fact, I'm glad that Jade is here. In fact, another member of our group, his name is Nego, he just got into a program in Canada to study communications in the context of social change. And that's one thing that we've been thinking about a lot, which is how to use technology to be able to go beyond what you called, Desmond, accurately, the formal structures that we know. You're right, you cannot be, I totally agree with you, that cannot rely on this one Minister of Education to make change that can be sustainable. We know that because look at what happened to Bernard. So Bernard in 82, he was a visionary, is what he wrote then to support his reform program was so ahead of his time. It was grounded in the best available science as to the power of the native language. That was 1982. And look at where we are today in 2024. So you're right, we cannot rely on one visionary to be able to make change in the long term. So what we're hoping, that as our project, as a platform is open resource, everybody can get access to it. We advertise for it on WhatsApp, and we know that what we advertise for gets spread around the country. We know that because we can look through Google Analytics, we can trace the use of the platform, and we know where it's being used. So we know that we have some traction across the country, you see. So, and I don't think it's accidental that the minister feels empowered to make some radical changes, including going against the 2021 curriculum that was funded and supported by quote-unquote experts from France. He went against that. And today, as we speak, my sense is that there's still a struggle between what he sees as the best curriculum for the students versus what France sees as the best curriculum for Haitian students to serve France's interests. But and there's something else which is happening, which also gives us hope. The fact that you have countries like Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, that are taking very strong stances to valorize their national languages and as a way to create support against French imperialism. You see, and I think that Macron is very well aware of the developments. And I think in the past few months, there's been a softening of the position of the French ambassador in Haiti around the issue of language. And I don't think that's accidental. And there too, one can think of technology. And maybe this is where, in fact, this is one reason why I was very happy to be invited to speak to you in this group because of the Pan-African, Pan-Caribbean connections. You see, because if the word goes around that this is possible in Haiti, it should also be possible in each of your countries. South Africa, Benin, Togo, Nigeria, Cameroon, Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso. And if this takes momentum across the continent, across the Caribbean, then folks like the Minister of Education in Haiti, even Macron, they will, in fact, Macron is already softening his stance in terms of France and its imperial power in Africa. You can see it because now it looks like there is more recognition by the French embassies in Africa and in Haiti that they should no longer go, head to head against the local languages, you see. So, but thank you for your question. But these are the things that come to mind as possible avenues for answer. But these are, you're right. These are challenging questions, but we need to think about them very seriously, very deeply. And given this group, I think hopefully this is a sort of exchanges that can create this sort of Pan-African, Pan-Caribbean unity for us to have enough power to be the counter-plantation movement against white supremacy. So that's the hope.
Yeah.
Thank you for this. Debo, if you don't mind, just a few seconds to add one quick note to this. I really appreciate your insight here. And I think the additional thought that was coming to mind while you were saying this is that all of us in this journey probably should take seriously that we don't have any exclusive preserve on the deployment of technologies, the idea of technologies, both materially and symbolically. So I would imagine that the likes of Macron and really, leaders, both political and corporate leaders in the Western world, have at their beck and call tools like WhatsApp and all other tools that they can use to sort of subvert any anti-colonial or counter-colonial struggle. So I think being aware of the fact that these resources are available to everybody with conflicting interests, I think should make us a bit more cautious, more tactful in the way we engage one another to make sure that we are not in this struggle, but not making any progress. And our children will come back to raise the same questions we are raising and repeat the same narrative that we're dealing with right now. But thank you so much. This is helpful.
Well, thank you for your questions. Yeah, and I'm sure that we'll keep thinking about your questions for a long time to come.
Okay, I'd now like to hand back to Professor Makoni, who would make his final comments.
Yeah, before I just sum up, is Kim around to tell us who is going to come next week? Is it Kim? Yes.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for this presentation. Next week, we have on April 5th at 9 a.m. Eastern Time, we have our colleague Kidani Mengestab from Penn State University. The title of the talk will be sent in the announcement email that I will send shortly. So thank you so much.
Right. Okay. Now we move to what is called, Michel, the after party, which is